Have you ever felt like you were trying to be a light, but were surrounded by people who feed off your darkness? Rumi wrote, "The wound is the place where the light enters you." But what if the person by your side insists on keeping the wound open? What if that person doesn't want healing, just company to remain in the emptiness? Don't associate with those who run from the light. You weren't born to crawl into the corners of other people's souls. You were born to shine, even when the whole world closes its eyes. Perhaps you are trying to save someone who doesn't want to be saved, carrying those who have already chosen to remain in the dark. And in this process, you are fading away. You can feel it, can't you? The exhaustion of giving everything and still never being enough. The frustration of seeing your love turn into effort. The silent pain of realizing you're trying to light a candle for someone who's blowing it out the whole time. Rumi also said, "Don't settle for stories of how things happen to others. Awaken your own legend." And its legend begins when you understand. There are people who don't want to be a light, because being a light requires courage. It requires facing one's own shadow. It requires growing up, and growing up hurts. You cannot heal someone who feeds on their own wound. You cannot enlighten someone who refuses to open their eyes. But you can, and must, choose yourself. That's the brutal truth. Powerful, uncomfortable, liberating. You're hiding in the name of love, but love that diminishes you. That's not love. It's prison. Don't associate with those who turn your soul into darkness. Don't extinguish your light to fit into places that no longer serve you. Because every time you dim your light to please others, a part of your essence dies. And perhaps you're already tired of dying in silence. But there's something no one has told you yet. Something that could change everything. And that's what we're going to talk about now. Before we continue, I want to invite you to do something simple, yet deeply symbolic. Write in the comments, "I choose to be light, even if I have to walk alone." This phrase is more than a comment. It's a pact with your own soul. If this beginning has already touched something inside you, leave your like now. This helps this content reach other souls who, like you, are trying to stay alive in a world that insists on fading away. Subscribe to the channel, because here, each video is a mirror of your pain, but also a key to liberation. This content is not just a video. It's a space where your light is welcome. And now let's go deeper. Have you ever felt that you shine too brightly for those who insist on living in the shadows? As if your light were a nuisance, a mirror that reveals what the other doesn't want to see. And yet, you remain, trying to be light where there is only denial, trying to be warmth in environments that only know how to freeze. Because your soul believes it can transform, heal, awaken. But there's something no one has told you. Not every soul wants to be touched by the light. Some prefer the silence of pain to the clarity of truth. And you, with all your dedication, end up being seen as an exaggeration, as a burden, as excess. It seems that the more you try to help, the more you fade away in the process. And nobody sees it. Nobody realizes how much you're giving beyond your capacity. You embrace the other person's pain as if it were your own. You try to make the other person see what you've already understood. And in this silent mission to save the other, you lose yourself. You diminish yourself. You become silent. Until the day you realize you no longer know who you are. Because you've become accustomed to being the support for someone who never offered you a safe haven. The problem is invisible because nobody talks about it. Nobody talks about the weariness of someone who loves deeply. The exhaustion of trying to keep a relationship alive alone. The loneliness that exists in being accompanied but emotionally ignored. You look around and it seems like everyone is fine, except you, and you start to wonder if the problem is you. But it isn't. The problem is that you're trying to light candles for souls that feed on their own darkness. You need to understand this. Choosing yourself isn't selfish. Cutting ties that suffocate you isn't coldness. It's emotional survival. It's silent healing. It's inner awakening. Because however painful it may be, there are people in your life who only exist to test how much you're willing to give of yourself for them. And every time you accept less than you deserve, you're telling your soul that it's not enough, that it needs to beg for crumbs, that it needs to settle for almost. But the truth is you were made for more, to love with presence, with truth, with reciprocity. Rumi said, "Don't associate with those who don't want to be light." And that goes beyond pretty words. It's spiritual guidance, a compass for your soul, Because when you insist on remaining in dark places, you not only extinguish yourself, you betray your essence. And no relationship is worth that. Perhaps at this very moment you are trying to fix someone who doesn't want to be fixed, waiting for a change that never comes, fantasizing about a future that will never exist. And with each passing day in this silent waiting, your heart grows sicker, your energy dwindles, your hope fades, and no one sees. Because you learn to smile even when broken, to embrace even when wounded, to care even when not cared for. This is the pain that no one sees. The pain of being a light in a world that prefers shadow. The pain of being profound in a generation that is content with shallowness. The pain of loving with your soul someone who only has room for lukewarm relationships. And no matter how much you try to hide it, this pain leaks through your eyes, your tired body, your swallowed words, your sleepless nights. And you know what's even crueler? When you finally decide to walk away, you still feel guilty, as if it were wrong to choose yourself, as if love were only valid if it hurt. But that's a lie they taught you, a lie that keeps you where your soul left long ago. Rumi said, "When you stop associating with those who choose darkness, the light within you begins to bloom. And perhaps you are afraid to bloom, because blooming requires leaving behind. It requires letting go of certain companions. It requires silencing ties that scream but do not nourish. And that hurts, but it also liberates. You feel it, don't you? That you no longer fit in this space, that this relationship, this friendship, this bond, no longer nourishes you. It only consumes you. And deep down, you know it, but you haven't had the courage to admit it yet, because you're afraid of being alone. But I'll tell you something with all the truth in my heart. Worse than being alone is being with someone and feeling like you're losing yourself every day. It's not your responsibility to carry those who refuse to walk. It's not your mission to save those drowning in their own choices. You can love and still let go. You can care and still leave. You can wish well and still choose not to destroy yourself for someone. That is true spiritual maturity. It is the wisdom of the soul that has understood that presence without reciprocation is imprisonment. You are not cold for distancing yourself. You are wise, because your light is sacred, and it shouldn't be wasted trying to illuminate those who insist on extinguishing it. Rumi said, "The light you seek is within you. So why continue seeking validation from those who only offer you rejection? The pain of being ignored, rejected, underestimated by someone you love, is real. But even more real is the strength you carry to be reborn, to say no, to close cycles, to look at yourself and say, enough. And when that moment arrives, it changes everything, because that's when you stop being a victim and start being the protagonist of your own healing." If you've made it this far and this text has spoken to your soul, write in the comments, "I refuse to erase myself to fit into the darkness of others." I want to read what you feel, because when you express yourself, you set yourself free. And perhaps by writing you'll discover that you're not alone, that there's a whole community of souls trying to do the same, to rekindle their flame. And that's already the beginning of healing. You're not just tired of the person. You're tired of the constant attempt to be a light in a darkness that doesn't want to be touched. You're exhausted from offering presence to someone who only gives you absence. The truth is, you're not just hurt because of a relationship. You're spiritually drained from trying so hard to illuminate someone who insists on remaining extinguished. This is the most hidden root of your pain. And perhaps you haven't yet realized this clearly, but the exhaustion that weighs you down doesn't just come from the other person. It comes from the effort of trying to keep alive a connection that died in your soul a long time ago. Rumi said, "Don't stay with someone who extinguishes your sacred fire. The soul needs to burn to be free." Burning in this context is not about self-destruction. It's about illumination. It's about expansion. It's about living with truth, intensity, soul. But you have been living with someone who doesn't want that flame. Someone who, faced with the brilliance of your essence, closes their eyes, turns their face away, and complains about the light. And you, out of love, attachment, or fear, have lowered your intensity. You have adjusted your brightness. You have done everything to avoid bothering them. But the soul feels it. The soul suffers every time you betray yourself in the name of a connection that doesn't honor who you are. This isn't just an emotional issue, it's a spiritual one. Because when you insist on staying in relationships where your light isn't welcome, you're unconsciously reinforcing an old belief. that you need to diminish yourself to be accepted, that you need to extinguish your own fire to fit into the limitations of the other person. This has much deeper roots than you imagine. It may have started long ago, when you learned that to love is to endure, that to deserve is to wait, that to surrender is to annihilate yourself. And now you repeat this cycle in silence, believing you're being strong, when in reality, you're only losing yourself. It's as if a part of you says, if I'm too much, he'll leave. If I show who I really am, she'll reject me. And then you start hiding parts of yourself, pruning yourself, adjusting yourself, until one day you look in the mirror and no longer recognize yourself. Because deep down, you stopped being who you are to try to keep someone who was never whole. That's the spiritual pain of someone who abandons themselves emotionally, the pain of someone who loves the other so much that they forget to love themselves. But there's something even deeper in all of this, something you may never have had the courage to face. There's a point where the other person stops being the problem, and you need to look at how much you've allowed yourself to be extinguished, how much you've put yourself in this role of healer, of savior, of keeping the flame alive, as if love were only real if it were sacrificial, as if you needed to constantly prove that you deserve to be chosen. That's not love. That's emotional conditioning. And it's time to break that pattern. You weren't made to beg for attention. You weren't made to deserve the bare minimum. You weren't made to lose yourself trying to fix someone who doesn't even want to be found. Rumi said, "The wound is the place where the light enters. But if that wound remains open, it's not because it lacks healing. It's because you insist on keeping it bleeding in an attempt to keep the other person close. You confuse depth with suffering, surrender with sacrifice, soul with attachment. But true spirituality is liberation, and liberation begins when you understand that loving also means knowing when to let go." Have you ever noticed how you feel each time your essence is invalidated? Each time you share your light and the other person responds with silence, coldness, or indifference? It's as if something inside you shrinks, as if your soul says, "Not here," and yet you persist, because you're afraid to leave, because you're afraid of the emptiness, because you've learned to confuse abandonment with presence. But staying where you can't be whole is also a kind of abandonment, perhaps even more cruel, because you abandon yourself every day, in front of someone who doesn't even notice what you feel. You're not just tired of the relationship, you're tired of yourself in this place, of the role you've taken on, of the effort you need to make, of the version you've created to try and maintain the connection. And that's why your energy is drained. That's why your faith is weak. That's why your soul is silent. It's not depression. It's not anxiety. It's the pain of being spiritually disconnected from who you truly are. Your soul knows it, feels it, and it's trying to call you back. You feel it like a weight on your chest, a pressure that has no name, a cry that won't come, a desire to vanish, to disappear, to run away from everything, and at the same time the fear of letting go of the little that remains. But that little isn't a root, it's a chain, and you're clinging to something that no longer takes you anywhere. You're just spinning in circles, reliving the same pain with another name, another face, another setting. The spiritual root of your weariness isn't the other person, it's repetition, it's the looping, it's your unconscious attempt to feel seen by someone who never truly saw you. It's as if, by healing the other person, you could heal that forgotten child who still lives inside you. But the cure isn't in the other person. It never was. It's in your decision to stop looking outside for what can only be found within. Rumi said, "You were born with wings. Why do you crawl through life?" And perhaps that's what's happening now. You, with wings, trying to fit into emotional cages. You, with light, trying to fit into the darkness of someone who doesn't even want change. You, with a soul, trying to live relationships that are just games of control, ego, and neediness. You deserve to experience a love that ignites, expands, and heals. A love that doesn't ask you to hide its intensity. A love that looks at your light and says, "Stay, shine." But to experience this, you first need to decide to break free from the cycle where you only know how to love through pain. If this part of the video resonated with you in some way, if you felt it spoke to your soul, write in the comments, "I refuse to crawl when I was born to fly." Your truth has power. And when you share what you feel, other souls recognize themselves as well. And together they grow stronger. Healing begins here, and there is still more to be revealed. What no one has told you until now is that you weren't made to convince anyone to be a light. You're not here to beg for reciprocity, nor to ignite souls that have chosen to remain in darkness. You were made to be, to exist in essence, to illuminate through presence, to touch lives with your truth, not with your sacrifice. The problem is that you've learned to measure your worth by how much the other person changes for you, as if your brilliance depended on the reflection in the eyes of those who look at you. But this is an illusion created by years of accumulated pain, emotional abandonment, and the mistaken belief that love is only love if it is earned. This belief is the most subtle prison. It makes you chase, insist, explain, justify, try, until you completely fade away, until your soul becomes a distant echo within you. But what if I told you that healing begins somewhere else, in a quiet, intimate, and often ignored place? Healing begins when you choose your own light, when you stop trying to illuminate those who prefer darkness. Because yes, there are people who feel threatened by the light, who are bothered by your authentic presence, who prefer the shallow, the lukewarm, the repetitive cycle of pain. And you need to stop molding yourself to be accepted in those spaces. That's not love, it's self-betrayal. How many times have you kept quiet to maintain peace? How many times have you swallowed your own intuition so as not to seem too intense? How many times have you stopped growing so as not to leave anyone behind? But what happens to the soul when it needs to shrink to fit into a small love? It gets sick. It distances itself from itself. It begins to forget who it is. And you feel this as an existential weariness, an inner emptiness, an absence of meaning that spreads to the little things. This is not a lack of love. It is an excess of self-abandonment. The spiritual key to healing isn't about changing others. It's about remembering who you are. It's about returning home. And your home is your soul. Rumi said, "Return to yourself. Do not seek outside what can only be found within." And perhaps you have searched everywhere, in others, in recognition, in validation, in the presence of someone who was never fully present. But now the time has come to turn inward, to rekindle your own light, to rebuild your presence without expecting others to understand. You are not here to beg for acceptance. You are here to be so whole that your very presence heals you. And whoever cannot bear that is not ready to walk beside you. Yes, it hurts. It hurts to let go. It hurts to accept that not all love is reciprocated. It hurts to realize that sometimes the other person was only there to show you what you hadn't yet healed within yourself. But this pain, unlike others, liberates, because it is the harbinger of rebirth. The key is, stop trying to be the salvation of those who choose their own prison. You can love deeply and still walk away. You can have good intentions and still decide not to destroy yourself for someone. This isn't coldness. It's spiritual awareness. It's the maturity of the soul that finally understands that some people only seek you out so they don't feel alone in their own darkness. But they will never light up with you. And you deserve more than being company for someone else's emptiness. You deserve a love that doesn't need constant proof, a space where your light isn't a burden, a connection where your depth isn't treated as a weight. But to get there, you need to let go. You need to relinquish control. You need to accept that not everything will be as you dreamed, and that's okay. Because what comes after that surrender is bigger, lighter, more real. But the first step is difficult. It requires you to take your eyes off the other person and turn your gaze inward. To stop asking, "Why didn't he choose me?" and start asking yourself, "Why do I keep choosing someone who doesn't see me?" That question is key. It hurts, but it reveals. It confronts, but it liberates, because it gives you back the power you unknowingly surrendered. Healing begins when you understand that you no longer need to chase after what has already left you. When you realize that the love you gave, even if unappreciated, is still sacred, but it doesn't need to continue being wasted. You can redirect that energy. You can turn that light inward. You can transform what was pain into presence, what was waiting into decision, what was scarcity into abundance of yourself. Rumi wrote, "What you seek is seeking you." But how will love find you if you continue hiding behind relationships that have already extinguished you? How will the light reach you if you insist on remaining in dark spaces for fear of being alone? The universe responds to your vibration, and your vibration only changes when you change what you accept. When you say, "Enough." When you take a stand. When you stop trading your own peace to maintain empty presences. This is the part of the journey where many give up, because it demands inner confrontation. It demands spiritual courage. But if you've made it this far, it's because something inside you already knows, already felt, already understood, and perhaps it's just waiting for permission. So here it is. You have permission to be light without needing to explain, to step away without needing to justify, to choose yourself without guilt, because your soul deserves it, and it knows it. If this part of the journey resonated with how you feel, leave a comment below. I choose my clarity above any darkness. Perhaps this is the first time you've said it out loud. Perhaps this is the first time you've truly chosen yourself. And that changes everything. Let's continue. There's still so much to reveal. Perhaps you are, at this very moment, in a relationship where everything is effort and nothing is returned. A space where you give, receive, wait, but the other person only delivers silence and shadow. And this silence is not peace, it's absence. An absence that weighs on your chest, that keeps you awake at night, that transforms love into anxiety. You start to wonder all the time, am I too much? Am I wrong for feeling so much? Is loving this way the problem? But the problem isn't loving too much. The problem is continuing to try to shine a light in a place where the other person feeds on darkness. Have you noticed that you've been diminishing your intensity to keep someone close? That you've been swallowing words, stifling desires, recalculating dreams, just to avoid losing someone who, in reality, was never fully there? That's not love. It's emotional exhaustion. It's a desperate attempt to be seen, validated, chosen, and that slowly consumes you. Do you remember when it all began? How there was hope? How you believed that loving enough was enough for everything to change? You gave yourself. You surrendered. You waited. You tried. You molded yourself to each silence. You bowed before each indifference, thinking that at some point the other person would wake up, that they would recognize your presence, that they would understand how much light you were amidst the chaos. But that never came. And over time, what was hope turned into doubt? What was surrender turned into demands? What was connection turned into shared loneliness? The pain isn't just from absence. It's from seeing yourself slowly fading away to fit into someone else's life. From realizing that, to remain there, you need to distance yourself from yourself. You need to extinguish your own flame. You need to become a reflection of the other person. And even then, it's never enough. Because the truth is harsh. You can do everything right and still not be chosen, not for lack of worth, but because the other person doesn't know how to recognize light when they live in darkness. And the cruelest part is that, even knowing this, you stay. Because there's an invisible thread holding you back, a feeling that if you leave, you'll lose something that could have been. And so you persist, not for what is, but for what you imagined it could be. You love the idea, the projection, the potential, but you get hurt in reality. And the reality is clear. You are alone in a relationship. This story is more common than you imagine. I know this because thousands of people have lived through exactly this. Relationships where one loves and the other settles, where one feels and the other ignores, where one tries to save and the other doesn't even realize they're sinking. And the one who loves deeply always carries the guilt, always wonders where they went wrong, when in reality, the mistake was simply remaining where their soul had already asked to leave a long time ago. But leaving isn't easy either, because you've created emotional bonds with the pain. You've become accustomed to loving in the dark, to waiting for crumbs and calling them an emotional meal. You've confused resistance with loyalty, enduring with love. But true love doesn't make you sick. It heals. It expands. It doesn't make you feel small, rejected, ignored. It embraces you. And if that's not present, then perhaps what it's called isn't love. It's attachment, fear, repetition of old wounds. You need to understand, it's not your role to carry the other person. You weren't made to be an emotional crutch, to sustain relationships alone. That's exhausting. It's unfair. It's inhumane to your soul. Because every day you insist on staying where you no longer belong, you reinforce to yourself that your light depends on the presence of someone who dims your light. And that's spiritual betrayal. It's the opposite of healing. It's the denial of your essence. Perhaps you're listening to this with tears in your eyes, because you know deep down that I'm talking about you, about the relationship you pretend is okay, about the pain you hide even from yourself, about the hope you refuse to let go of. But, at this very moment, your soul is asking you to make a choice. It's telling you that enough is enough, that you need to go home. And your home is the place where you don't have to fight to be seen, where you don't have to bleed to be loved, where you can be whole, intense, true, without fear of being too much. This is the moment to look honestly, to acknowledge what your soul already knows, to stop saving those who don't want to be saved, to stop waiting for answers that will never come. Healing isn't in the other person. It's in your decision to choose yourself, to say enough is enough, to understand that deserving love shouldn't require sacrificing your light. If this example touched you, if this story seems like yours or someone you know's, write in the comments. I free myself from the pain of trying to be enough for those who never saw me. Perhaps this is your first step toward escaping a darkness that isn't yours. And that changes everything. We'll go even deeper. There are still more truths to reveal. You weren't made to dim your own light just to avoid bothering others. You weren't made to hide behind strategic silences, nor to walk with your head down pretending everything is all right. The truth is, you know you're betraying yourself. You know you're erasing yourself in the name of a peace that doesn't exist, a presence that doesn't sustain, a love that only demands from you. And you feel it every day, not as a sharp pain, but as a constant feeling of disconnection, as if you were living a life that isn't yours, as if you've transformed into someone who merely survives, when in truth, everything within you yearns to truly live. Rumi said, "You were born with wings. Why do you crawl through life?" And perhaps at this moment you realize that you have been doing exactly that you have been emotionally dragging yourself through relationships that don't uplift you, that you have been accepting little, much less than you deserve because you believe that's the most you can have. And this thought is a slow poison. It corrodes your self-esteem, your spirituality, your confidence. It convinces you that being intense is a mistake, that being profound pushes people away, that being too genuine scares them. But the truth is that what scares them is not your light. It's the shadow of those who refuse to grow alongside you. You need to stop adapting to what diminishes you. You need to understand once and for all that true love doesn't demand that you erase yourself. True love doesn't shrink you, doesn't silence you, doesn't reduce you. True love expands, heals, elevates. But this only happens when you take a stand, when you choose to fly, even if it means leaving behind those who refuse to leave the ground. Because love isn't a place where you should crawl. Love is an open sky, and you have wings. How many times have you noticed yourself censoring yourself, choosing your words carefully so as not to be misunderstood, hiding your emotions to avoid judgment, pretending not to care when inside you're screaming for connection? That's not emotional maturity. That's fear. Fear of rejection, fear of abandonment, fear of being completely yourself. But living in fear is the opposite of living with soul. And your soul is tired of pretending. It's asking for courage. It's begging for freedom. Freedom isn't the absence of ties. It's being in relationships where you can breathe, where you can be whole, where there's no need to constantly prove you're worthy of staying. And maybe you haven't experienced that yet. Maybe you think it doesn't exist. But I assure you, it does. It's just not where you keep insisting. It's not with the person who ignores you. It's not in the relationship that drains you. It's not in the cycle where you need to suffer to be noticed. It's somewhere else. And that place begins within you. You need to break free from the idea that you need to deserve love. Love isn't merit. Love is connection. And when there's connection, everything flows. When there's truth, everything aligns. When there's presence, there's no need to beg for attention. But to experience this, you need to make difficult choices. You need to accept that some people won't go with you, that some connections are just bridges, not destinations, that some stories end before the end because what they had to teach you has already been delivered. And this, however painful it may be, is liberating. It is in this shift in consciousness that your life changes, when you understand that it's not selfish to distance yourself, that it's not coldness to cut ties that make you sick, that it's not insensitivity to stop responding to messages that only bring you confusion. That is self-love. That is presence. That is listening to your own soul saying, "Not here." You don't need another repeated cycle. You need a new decision. You need to stop crawling emotionally in search of crumbs and start flying towards connections that nourish you. And flying, here, isn't about impulsively leaving everything behind. It's about making conscious choices. It's about looking at yourself with compassion and asking, what have I tolerated in the name of fear? What do I keep accepting because I think there's nothing better? Because the truth is, you deserve more. You always have. But while you remain trapped in this cycle, you can't see what lies beyond. You can't see the sky when you insist on living underground. Your soul has a calling. It wants you whole, present, authentic, and you no longer need to ask permission to be yourself. You no longer need to justify yourself. You no longer need to adapt. Healing begins when you recognize yourself. When you say, I will no longer dim my light to fit into small spaces, and this stance creates a field of transformation. It's not the other person who changes. It's you. And when you change, everything changes. If you are feeling this transition now, this awakening, this inner movement that no longer allows you to remain where you once accepted being, then you are ready to fly. And it doesn't matter who goes with you or not. What matters is that you follow, that you obey your soul, that you choose yourself, because your light deserves to be lived, not hidden. If this part of the video deeply affected you, and you feel it's time to get up, write in the comments, I choose to fly even if in silence, and let the universe hear this silent commitment you are making now with your own soul. Let's move on. The path continues, and there is more light waiting for you. Sometimes it's not about loving or ceasing to love. It's not about presence or absence, not even about how much one tried, how much one waited, how much one resisted. Sometimes it's about understanding that love, however true it may be, doesn't survive where the soul is suffocated. It doesn't flourish where there is fear. It doesn't breathe where there is no space. And this realization doesn't arrive all at once. It approaches little by little like a silent breeze that crosses the chest and says without words, this is no longer your place. You can love someone deeply and still feel like you're slowly dying. You can wish the other person well, and at the same time realize that the price you're paying for their presence is your own absence. There are times when you need to be radically honest with your soul and say, this environment is making me sick, this relationship is shrinking me, this bond is fragmenting me, and this honesty hurts, because it destroys the fantasy. It tears away the veil. It confronts all the versions of yourself that believed that if you were good enough, everything would work out. But the spiritual truth is that you cannot awaken someone who still chooses to sleep. You cannot force clarity where the other insists on keeping their eyes closed. You cannot lead anyone to the light if the person is still committed to their own shadow. And that's okay. Everyone has their own time. But your time has come. It's time to stop waiting for the other person and start waking up to yourself. Because continuing to sleep next to someone who doesn't want to wake up is a kind of anesthesia of the soul. And an anesthetized soul doesn't live. It only repeats. How many times have you felt like you were screaming inside? Screaming for something the other person didn't hear? Screaming for space, for understanding, for a look that truly recognized you. And yet, all you received was silence. A silence that didn't heal. A silence that made you doubt yourself. This silence is the cruelest absence, because it comes disguised as neutrality, but carries a paralyzing weight. It makes you question your own perception. It makes you wonder if you're exaggerating, if you're demanding too much, if the problem is you. But it's not. The problem is the disconnection, the emotional distance, the abyss that forms when two souls are in the same physical space, but in completely different dimensions of presence. And the more you try to reach the other, the more you realize you are moving away from yourself, because you need to leave yourself to enter the other's world. And this movement, repeated many times, ends up becoming your prison. You forget who you are to try to be what the other can tolerate, but your soul wasn't made to endure. It was made to expand, to shine, to touch the world with its deepest truth. And as long as you remain in places where you need to edit yourself, you will be denying that expansion, denying your calling, denying your rebirth. Because yes, this is a rebirth, and every rebirth requires a death. The death of an old pattern, the death of an old version, the death of an expectation that no longer serves you. You need to let go of what prevents your soul from breathing. You need the courage to face the grief of letting go of what was never light. And perhaps you are feeling this now. The weight of the goodbye that never happened. The pain of the ending that is still suspended. The confusion between love and attachment. Between presence and habit. But trust me, what is true does not demand that you destroy yourself. What is true does not feed on your pain. What is true recognizes you, sustains you, elevates you. This profound reflection is not an accusation. It's not about judging the other person or portraying yourself as a victim. It's about awakening, about opening your eyes to recurring patterns, about realizing that you've been abandoning yourself for a long time in the name of a connection that was never reciprocal. And when you realize this, something breaks inside, but something is also set free, because you finally understand that your pain doesn't just come from what the other person does, but from how much you've tolerated it as if it were normal. You are not weak for feeling. You are not exaggerating for wanting presence. You are not needy for wanting reciprocity. This is human. This is spiritual. This is the soul asking to be recognized, and you need to honor this request. You need to start responding to the needs of your soul with the same urgency that you have always responded to the demands of others. The time has come to choose yourself, to embrace yourself, to listen to yourself deeply. And if you feel that moment has arrived, even if there is still fear, even if there is still pain, write in the comments, "My soul will no longer be suffocated by the need to keep absent presences." Write this as an act of truth, as a commitment, as a liberation, and let the words be the beginning of your new cycle. Let's move forward. The journey still has much to reveal. An enlightened soul attracts what is true, but this doesn't happen automatically. Just because you have a pure heart doesn't mean the right love will find you immediately. Just because you have light doesn't mean everyone around you will know how to handle your brilliance. Spiritual truth is more complex. To attract what resonates with its truth, the soul must first break free from everything that keeps it in emotional darkness. It needs to stop begging for crumbs. It needs to rise from the table where there is no more food and walk towards the sacred, even if that path is lonely. And this is where many give up, because it's easier to accept any crumb than to face the emptiness that precedes true abundance. It's more comfortable to remain in lukewarm relationships than to confront the silence of an empty house, of a body unaccustomed to its own presence. But your soul wasn't made to live on almost. It wasn't born to feed on emotional leftovers. It doesn't sustain itself on unequal exchanges. It demands wholeness. It demands depth. It demands truth. And it only receives this when you stop begging for love and begin to nourish yourself from within. Rumi said, "Don't associate with those who don't want to be light, because your soul is already in the process of ascension." This means that while you insist on remaining connected to people who haven't yet chosen their own journey of awakening, you sabotage your own. You reduce your own spiritual field to fit into spaces that no longer accommodate your frequency. And that hurts, because ascending is often about losing. It's about letting go. It's about releasing ties that don't match your new vibration. Do you feel it? That silent distance between you and those who once seemed like home? That feeling of displacement in shallow conversations, in relationships that once made sense but now seem empty? This isn't spiritual arrogance. It's a sign that your soul is asking for more. It's asking for coherence. It's telling you that the time for repetition is over, that the time has come to choose who you walk with, who you share your energy with, who you lay your head on, who you build with. And this choice can no longer be made based on the fear of loneliness. It needs to be made based on your expansion. What doesn't nourish you makes you sick. What doesn't see you hurts you. What doesn't lift you up pulls you down. And you've already spent too much time trying to carry those who don't want to walk. You've already bent over too much to maintain ties that only exist in your insistence. You've already been silent too much so as not to lose what little remained. But your soul wants wholeness. It wants true silence. It wants complete presence. It wants exchanges that sustain and don't just demand sacrifice. Rumi's poetry is not romantic. It is raw, profound, transformative. It doesn't speak of a comforting love, but of a confronting love. A love that shakes you up, that pushes you inward, that forces you to look at everything you've tried to hide. And perhaps now is your moment to face what you still hold on to out of fear, to look into the eyes of what you call love and ask if there is still life there. to let go of everything that limits your light. Do not associate with those who do not wish to be light, because every time you associate with them, you delay your ascension. You slow down the sacred process that is already happening within you, a process that does not depend on others but is profoundly impacted by your choices. You can choose to remain in the same cycle, or you can choose to move forward, even with a heavy heart, even with trembling hands, even without knowing what comes next. And that choice is the key that opens the portal to your new life. An enlightened soul is not afraid of darkness, but neither does it surrender to it. It doesn't try to save it. It doesn't become contaminated. An enlightened soul observes, understands, loves, but moves on. It bathes in truth. It nourishes itself with silence. It anchors itself in its own light, and therefore it attracts what vibrates at the same frequency. But before that happens, it needs to go through the desert. It needs to traverse the pain of separation. It needs to trust that there is something greater guiding every loss, every silence, every rupture. And there is. You are being guided, even now. Even in this instant when everything seems dark, confusing, meaningless, there is something greater in motion, and that something is the intelligence of your own soul saying, you can no longer deny who you are. You can no longer try to fit into structures that cannot accommodate your expansion. You can no longer live halfway. Either you surrender to your light, or you will remain trapped in the shadows you chose in the name of a love that only exists in your expectation. If this part of the journey resonated with your soul, write in the comments, "My soul is already ascending. I will not return to the darkness." Write with intention. Let your words be like an intimate prayer, because sometimes all your soul needs is to be heard by you. Let's continue. The journey isn't over yet. The crossing continues. You who have come this far, feeling every word, letting each passage pass through you with the force of a truth that perhaps had been dormant for too long. Know this, it was not by chance. No soul touches this kind of content without already being in some way in the process of awakening. And if something within you trembled, fell silent, reacted, or wept, it is because your soul no longer accepts living in the darkness of denial. There is something in you, something silent, subtle, but extremely true, that has already chosen the light. Even if on the surface fear still exists, even if the pain still screams, even if attachment persists. And that choice is sacred, because it's not made by reason. It's made in the silence between a tear and a sigh. It's made in that instant when you realize you can't go on anymore, that you can no longer be half, that you can no longer pretend everything is all right when your soul is suffocating inside. That's the breaking point, the threshold between who you've been to please others and who you were born to be. And crossing that border requires courage. It requires rebirth. It requires you to stand up, even without certainty, even with a broken heart, and say, I choose the light, even if it hurts to walk away. This phrase isn't just a comment. It's a spiritual milestone. It's the verbalization of a decision your soul has already made, but that your body is still trying to accept. Because distancing yourself hurts. Breaking ties hurts. Closing cycles hurts. The pain is real, but even more real is what comes after it. The clarity, the lightness, the peace you didn't even remember existed, the reconnection with parts of yourself that you abandoned, trying to hold on to the other person's presence. All of this begins to return when you stop chasing what rejects you and start walking towards what strengthens you. And this isn't just about romantic relationships. It's about all the bonds that consume your light without nourishing you in return. It could be a romantic relationship, a friendship, a family environment, a job, even an old idea of who you should be. Anything that forces your soul to shrink to fit in is, in practice, preventing you from ascending. And there is nothing more spiritually violent than preventing your own soul from growing. You feel it in your skin. It feels like an invisible weight, like a nameless sadness, like an apathy that takes over the things that once ignited you. Suddenly, you no longer find pleasure in what made your heart vibrate. You no longer recognize yourself in conversations that once seemed so familiar. You no longer find meaning in the places that always welcomed you. And this may seem like emptiness, but it's not the end. It's the beginning of purification. It's the field being cleared so that something new can flourish. The soul knows when something is ending, even when you try to insist, Even when you try to revive, rebuild, rescue, there's a point where life refuses to continue sustaining what has become a neediness disguised as love. And that point, however painful it may be, is the beginning of everything your soul came to experience. Because it's only when you stop begging for presence that you begin to encounter your own. And in this reunion, everything changes. You begin to remember what moves you, what ignites you, what is light, what pulsates, and for the first time in a long time you breathe. You listen to yourself. You realize you were trying to convince the other person to choose you, when it was you who needed to choose yourself all along. And in that instant, something inside you reorganizes itself. It's not euphoria. It's not anger. It's peace. A peace that comes from recognizing your own truth. You begin to understand that distancing yourself isn't abandonment. It's honoring. Honoring yourself. Honoring the other person's journey. Honoring the space each person occupies in the time they are able to. And that each conscious separation isn't a loss. It's a liberation. Because it's not about never loving again. It's about loving without losing yourself. About loving without needing to erase yourself. About loving without needing to carry the other person in your arms while dragging yourself along. And maybe you still don't know how to do it. Maybe you're afraid. Maybe you don't have a plan. And that's okay. You don't need to have all the answers right now. You just need to take a stand, to get moving, to make the choice your soul is asking for. And the rest, the universe, will take care of the rest. Because the entire universe aligns when you decide not to abandon yourself anymore. So if you've made it this far, don't leave in silence. Don't revert to autopilot as if nothing happened. Something inside you has changed, and that change deserves to be honored. With words, with gestures, with decisions, with clarity. Therefore, comment here. I choose the light, even if it hurts to walk away from it. Write this as if you are opening a door, as if you are crossing a portal, as if you are leaving the past where it needs to stay, and making space for what is new, light, true, and profoundly spiritual. The journey is not over yet. There is more light waiting for you. Let's move on. If you've stayed this far, it's because something inside you recognized itself on this path. That says a lot about your soul, about your courage, your process, your search for truth. And that's why I want to invite you with an open heart to subscribe to the channel now. Because here you won't just find videos, you'll find mirrors of your pain, bridges to your healing, and words that embrace what the world has never known how to name. If this resonated with you, leave a like as a gesture of presence. Not for me, but for yourself. Because every click is a silent declaration. I listened to myself until the end. And now, it doesn't stop here. The next video is already appearing on your screen. There, your soul will understand why the silence you have so often avoided is precisely the answer you have always sought. The journey continues, and your soul knows it. Let's go together.